Welcome to Demonos Pod, episode 6, with Tino and Matt. What's up, Matt?
It's going well, going good.
Right
Countdown to
on.
spring training.
That's right. Today
Enough
we are
of
going
football.
to cover our top 10 Dynasty minor league catching prospects. But first, a little update. We both joined a new Dynasty Points League, which is currently having our dispersal draft, and there are 7 teams in the dispersal draft. Is that right?
Yes, 12 teams total.
What's your team look like so far?
I got Witt Jr. in the first round, which is nice because I'm in 3 leagues and he's across the board in my leagues.
Awesome.
I like to have that sense of consistency.
Mm-hmm.
And then second pick is somebody I've always tried to get in our main league, which is Jazz. And I'm not sure. I'm still getting used to how points works because Jazz and Witt aren't the best with K. They're going to hurt you with Ks, and I think Witt is going to. I think both of them could develop the eye and the walks as they as pitchers pitch around them.
Sure.
But and then with my third pick, I picked Cassis.
Mm-hmm.
I was aiming for Vinny P, but somebody around the turn out the snake got
I
Vinny
saw
P.
that. You got sniped. It's interesting because I did some digging into the kind of the points, because I don't play in points leagues typically, kind of how
Mhm.
points leagues work and what the scoring looks like. And I was looking for little edges or advantages, and the only thing I find is that pitching is a lot more valuable in points leagues than it is any other league. At least this the way this scoring works. But that said, the scarcity of certain positions in this draft is pretty interesting, and I also just think ultimately talent is talent. And so you don't want those super high strikeout guys, especially if they don't take walks in a points league. But it doesn't mean that you completely flip your rankings upside down. I still think a talented player is a talented player. We may just not seek out things like steals quite
Mhm.
as much or saves quite as much as we might in other leagues.
Especially if they're younger too. That
Mhm.
some of that stuff could develop if you're drafting for talent. You just need to stick with it.
Right. So I
Plus,
took.
I like to have fun with it, so I like to draft players I like. I almost got it was between Cassis and Cruz,
Mhm.
and I almost got Cruz, but I thought that the 3 of them together with my 2 prior players would be too much. But
A
you
lot of
then you take
strikeouts.
Cruz right after me.
Right. So I took Rutschman in the first round. I think there were other good catchers. It was more of a there weren't other players didn't differentiate themselves in other in at other positions, and I really believe in Rutschman's skill set, as I've talked about before, and so I wanted to have him in one league at least, and so I took him in the first round, and then I'm kind of towards the end. I'm not on the wheel, but I'm the next pick. So my next pick, which was 3 picks later, I took Gunnar Henderson. I've stated that I'm not quite as high on Gunnar as some others are, but I still see a very high quality 2020 player at third base. And third base was slim pickings after the top few. So, and I don't see a ton of prospects on the way other than unless you feel like waiting for quite a while.
Mhm.
Um, and then my third pick, I did take O'Neal Cruz. And so I like that trifecta of Cruz, Gunnar Henderson, and Rutschman to get started in this league. But it's clear both of us are looking for early 20s players that we can hold on to for the next 10 years. And there's a lot of good veterans that are still out there, a lot of great pitching still out there. But I leave that to some that's less fun for me,
Mhm.
I think.
I like that we got players that are already playing too. So young and playing, so we're not going to be
Waiting
not
forever.
too deep in the cellar.
The other thing before we get started on catchers, did you happen to see Pipeline came out with their new shortstop top 10 today?
Oh no, I didn't. Not
Just
yet.
came out because I checked earlier this morning and it wasn't there yet. Any guesses as to who number one is?
Um,
So I'll say before you answer, I will say Ellie is listed as a shortstop.
okay. I don't think they would go Ellie. Um, I'm trying to think their list. They tend to be very consistent as far as who they've ranked before. So I would say Volpe would
So
be
the
one.
top five were Volpe, Meyer, Ellie, Lawler, Holiday. And then 6 through 10 was Merrill, Luciano at 7, which is interesting. So one, it's interesting that they still kept Luciano that high. Also interesting that they kept him at short, because I feel like he's not going to stay there. Ellie's listed
The
at
GM
short.
said he's starting at third in this.
Awesome. And then Ellie is listed as shortstop third. 8th is Tovar. Interesting that Luciano is above Tovar for me.
Yes.
And then Marte 9th still has a shortstop. And then
Marte's in our draft, right?
What's that?
Marte's in our draft. You better look out. Kirby is too.
I know. I'm actually considering Kirby pretty soon.
He's on my list too.
So, and then Brooks Lee 10. So obviously people are down on Marte. I still don't. I guess I'll be the last one on Marte Island potentially. And then the other interesting one to me was just Ellie at 3. Just because it's kind of, I don't know if people are digging into his season more, or if it's not prospect fatigue, but just people are tired of talking about him. But it's interesting that he's falling compared to where he was at the end of the season, and compared to when you look at his statistics. Like, his statistics were incredible last year. I think that there's a little bit too much hate right now on what he's done.
Or they could be listening to our pod.
Right? All right, man. Catchers. Do we want to go 1 through 10 or 10 through 1?
Either way, I'm fine. I got to have them all up here.
Let's start.
We want to talk about process too as we go through.
Yeah. So, why don't you talk to me a little bit about, or share with the listeners a little bit about what you did in evaluating each prospect? How much time did you spend? Kind of, what are some of the things you look at? Some of your resources.
Okay. So first things first, I grew up with the baseball bunch and Gary Carter on the baseball bunch. So I've always, since I've started playing fantasy at this, beginning of the 2000s, I was always looking for that catcher. So this is one of my biased positions. That said, it's been really shitty with catchers, right? Even I think we were talking about this before. Even the top tier catchers really don't jump out at you. JT is consistent across the board, but nothing that's really elite. Even when we have the tiers, I would want to tier the current catchers kind of as tier 2 right now, because there's really no elite tier 1. I think Adley will be there maybe after this year. So anyway, as far as filtering out catchers and kind of ranking them, I'm trying to stick consistent to what I think are good filters for the minors, which would be contact rate. I'm starting to put eye in there a lot more, especially if there's clues of development of eye. Just looking at the stats as far as how eye affects not only OPS but batting average. The stats across the board. Somebody that has a low ratio of walks to Ks, like you're talking 7% chance that they'll ever be a 300 hitter, right? If that ratio is low. Whereas if it's 1-to-1 like Vinny, it's over 50% chance that they'll be a 300 hitter. So walks are a good indicator, as well as contact rate. So back on the Ellie thing, Ellie's at in the 60s in contact rate, and that translates, if somebody's in the 60s in contact rate in the majors, that's like what, 237, 225, 225 in batting average. So I use those as filters along with hard hit, and I'm hoping we get the minor league med metrics so we could get EV.
Totally. I think that'll be a game changer. One question about contact rate. It's something that obviously podcasters talk about, you and I talk about, we talk about with Aaron quite a bit. I'm starting to question whether elite, like over like 90% contact rate is actually, or 90% zone contact is something that is desired, or if it's something that is almost creates a lot of weakly hit balls. Like, if your hand-eye coordination is so good and you never miss, right? You see players grounding out 6-3, 4-3 all the time, popping up because they just don't miss the ball. And I think about, there are a couple of high contact catchers that we looked at that I just am not interested in because I feel like they're not hitting for power
Mm-hmm.
because they make so much contact all the time. And so to me, there is kind of a threshold almost where you can start to say that a player is making too much contact and you want them to be more selective.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that we don't talk about quite as much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
That's why I want to bring I into it a lot more because
mhm.
that's gonna balance it out. So I think we could almost have a Luis Matos rule, right?
Right,
Because I invested highly in him last year because I was all about hard hit and contact, but he swings at everything,
right,
and that's going to weaken your contact. It's going to is his selection just isn't going to give quality hits.
right. Or like a high contact, high zone contact, but high chase rate as well.
Yes.
Kind of
Mm-hmm.
is like the Luis Matos model, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. We don't necessarily share a process all the time, you and I offline, but we're on the same path because so I gave each player that I scouted a hit grade, a power grade, a speed grade, but I also added a discipline grade.
Mm-hmm.
And discipline for me is both is chase rate and walk rate kind of mixed in together. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a way for me to because it's a skill that I really value. And I think I'm beginning to value even more as time goes on, as I see some of the correlation between well, not see it, it's something we know, but players that get on base score runs, right? And players that walk a ton typically are most of the time are selective enough to be able to pick out really good pitches.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you're just like I roster Acuna and Julio in our home league, and so I think they're kind of the opposite where they're so good they just make big contact on everything. But unless you have that elite skill, I think looking for someone who's selective with a good eye is a big deal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I added that as a fourth grade for me. The other part, so I'll share this real quickly. The other thing that I do with in terms of scouting is I add. So I did obviously player level, how they were ranked, weight, height, how they were acquired, but then triple slash for 22 top line stats, and then ground ball, fly ball, walk, and K percentage. But after that, I just started looking at video, right? And I've seen these players before, but I really did dig into as much video as I could find online. And I looked at, and I admittedly, like I'm not a swing genius or a swing guru. So, but I played baseball. And so I know some of the things to look for. And I'm looking for big hitches in the swing. I'm looking for, their head kind of turning or them stepping in the bucket, just normal shit that I grew up understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And took some of those scouting notes and then graded their tools based on what I saw, and then put out a potential, what I felt like was maybe their 90th or 100th percentile season, the potential peak season, and then some of the risk as well. But this was a fun exercise for me. I'll publish this once we're done. But basically, it was looking at numbers, coming to some conclusions based on numbers, and then trying to pick those numbers apart based on what I saw on film
Mm-hmm.
for each one of the 10 prospects. It's a big undertaking to
Mm-hmm.
deal with each position, but super, super fun.
Mm-hmm. And your own projections.
Right. So this actually isn't the order. What I have here is not the order of what I actually have.
Oh,
So
okay.
that'll be fun. Um, so let's start. Do we have the same number one catcher?
I don't think so because
No?
the number one for me is the one that's always been a part of our debate and no longer on my main home team. So I have Francisco Alvarez at number one.
Okay.
And largely because of the potential there, the age, he has more or less matured, right? But he
Mm-hmm.
still is experience wise quite young compared to the competition as far as experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, his bat to ball is still incredible, high EVs. He has the second highest hard hit rate of the 10 catchers on my list. I was surprised who has number one.
Who is number one?
Bo Naylor.
Huh, cool.
At least according to what Roto is providing for us. Again, I want the EVs, right?
Right.
MLB, give us the EVs for minors. But anyway, so I have him still as number one. I like his high walk rate. He's 15% walk rate. There is swing and miss. But I think that could be adjusted because early on it wasn't so much an issue. I think last year was a tough time for him in adjusting. I think the Mets, I don't like the Mets org for developing players.
What is it about the Mets that bothers you?
There's just no consistency in their system, and I think they rush players through. Even with they have highly talented players, even Marciano, right? That's how you say it. Did I get that right? Mauricio, sorry. Mauricio, he's he's a top 100 talented player, but his discipline hasn't developed. He hits the ball hard. They're able to identify that, but there's just not tons of development there. Same thing with Alvarez. You're going to give his first major league at bat to be against Jansen in a bases loaded situation last year.
Right.
That's not confidence building, right?
Right.
Jansen can be hittable, but for he's awkward, right? He's tough to read. And so once he kind of got, what did he have? 14 at bats with the Mets. Once he got into the flow, he started to be more patient, and he hit the two homers towards the end. But I'll still stick with him. The other thing that I like about catchers, and we've talked about this before, there's kind of the Mike Elias rule, the GM of Baltimore, where he said with Rutschman this year, he's going to give him 120 max at catcher and then 20 at first or DH, 20 plus. I think I really like that rule. So I'm looking for catchers that can max out on defense. And no matter how good they're in defense, they're not going over 120 games. But I want,
right?
And that's what happened to Gary Carter, right? Gary Carter, once he hit his 30s, he went downhill because he was just overused.
Right.
So I like having a catcher that could give you the 120 max and then play elsewhere. Francisco obviously isn't gonna have the 120 max, but he's gonna play elsewhere. Right. My only concern with him is he could turn into a Carlos Santana, right? Quickly off the position and just into DH only. So as far as long-term investment, I'd be willing to knock him down from one because of that. I'm not like with these first 3 or 4, I don't have any convictions as far as who should be number one here.
Sure. I should add before I comment on Alvarez that I did include Gabriel Moreno in this. I know he's not eligible by a couple of at-bats, but I think he's a part of this group, and I see him in the same way, even though he's not technically a prospect anymore. So I have Alvarez at, believe it or not, I have him at 2. So this is an example of why I think doing your own rankings and doing your own scouting and digging deeper into a prospect is really valuable. I know where Alvarez is ranked by a lot of the prospect people. I know how highly touted he is. I watched a few of his games last year. Came away unimpressed. Not unimpressed. I think the better word is just, I talked about it before. He's a 20 run, right? 20 speed. And it's ugly, an ugly 20. It's not coordinated. It's upright. It's heavy. He's got the heaviest feet I've ever seen on an athlete essentially. Lacks explosion. It's like he trained to go distance and there's no explosion, right? He's not a sprinter. But as I watched, I saw elite hand-eye coordination. And for someone who's that strong, right? He's 5'10", 233. And he's just an absolute just tank. For someone who's that strong to have that kind of elite hand-eye coordination, even though his stance is kind of crazy, he reminds me a little bit of, in a weird way, of Gary Sheffield. because his bat is just kind of, he's whipping his bat through the zone, and it's so violent, right? But his hand-eye coordination is so great that he might be unathletic in every way other than being just a hitter, and a hitter that can hit the ball a country mile. So, and he didn't have the same sort of like weight transfer as someone like Cartaya. He didn't, he wasn't loading up so big on his back leg and trying to explode at the ball. It looked like it's a pretty swing despite the violence and despite his size. And then I saw him hit a low and outside fastball to dead center field, right? And then hit a hanging breaking ball just a mile. And so the fact that while his swing is kind of crazy, there's not a ton of noise elsewhere. And you see him hit pitches that he has no business hitting, like that low and outside fastball to dead center. And the elite hand-eye coordination. I think that I'm coming around on him quite a bit. He's not, I think his risk is still, I have his risk as mid because I think he'll play, his bat will play. You just don't know if it's first base or catcher or full-time DH. But if he's not a catcher anymore, then he's more of a normal kind of average player and not an elite catcher. He was signed for 2.7 million out of Venezuela in 18. So, people saw his talent immediately. And he takes walks, right? So he had a 14.1% walk rate last year. So he's my number 2. I have his hit as a 55, power as a 70, speed as 20, and discipline as 55. I think he'll take walks, but I think he's going up there looking to hit. I don't think he's looking to walk. So I anticipate that walk rate being kind of league average, but not because he's not able to. And then potential for him, I put 260, 350, 550. I think there's a 900 OPS season in him and about 35 home runs. That's his peak, right? I think that's his 90th percentile achievement. But as you said, is he Carlos Santana, right? Is he coming off catcher next year? I don't really know. And I don't trust the Mets to do the right thing with him. But I'm much higher on him after watching film than I was, I think, at the end of last season. And that's despite, I don't love unathletic players like that. But he is a pure hitter, and he has that elite hand-eye coordination I'm starting to value more and more every day.
On the 20 speed thing, I think it's important, especially once you get to head. You want consistent distribution, and no matter what he does in the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning, if he comes up clutch with a walk, a double, you're going to get pissed off because he's going to be taken out and run. It's kind of the Miranda effect last year. I was cheering for Miranda all the way, and he comes up with clutch hits, and if it's past the 7th, he's going to be run for.
It sucks.
Yeah, and so if it goes extras, or if the runner that ran scores a run, that in Roto, that's not going to be huge. But as far as the distribution of your competition with your in head to head, that's going to hurt you.
Right. Well, and I'll also say that there aren't going to be two factors with regards to speed. One, there aren't a lot of kind of all or nothing speed guys anymore, meaning we don't see the 0 steals and the 20 speed nearly as much as we once did. And then I'm speaking specifically with Roto, but there are a lot of really athletic catchers. When I go down my list of catchers, there's 2 catchers on this list, maybe 3 catchers on this list that I think are like total zeros with speed, right? They're 20 or 30 speed and 0 steals, but there are a bunch of catchers that are going to get double-digit steals. We see really athletic catchers nowadays. It's not the Mike LaValliere catcher of, yesteryear. And so if you're taking that 0 in a Roto league and everyone else is getting 5 to 10 steals from their catcher, you're immediately putting yourself behind the 8 ball. So I think that's also something to consider down the road, to watch and see how the new rules impact steals. Watch and see how, who's a good example on my list? Does Logan O'Hoppe get 10 steals just because he's a decent athlete? He had 7 last season in AA, right? He might. And that all of a sudden now you're 10 steals behind in Roto because you have Alvarez and somebody else has O'Hoppe. Is that worth the extra 3 to 5 home runs? You have to ask yourself that question. All right. Who is your number two?
My number two, well, yeah, so I'm looking for the one that's going to coordinate with who I think is your number one. But my number two is Andy Rodriguez. Pirates 6'0", 170. Coming over in a trade. Was it Lucchesi who the trade was?
Lucchesi. So there's the 3-team trade in 21 offseason. Joe Musgrove was the big name, went from Pittsburgh to San Diego. The Mets received Joey Lucchesi as their return on this trade, and San Diego sent David Bednar, Hudson Head, and Omar Cruz from the Padres to the Pirates. Okay. Also, so the Mets' contribution to get Joey Lucchesi was sending Andy Rodriguez to the Pirates as well.
Yeah, again, a questionable Mets move with the youth, right? So, what I like about Andy, again, he fits the metrics we're looking for. He's close to 80% contact, 11, over 10% walk rate. His hard hit isn't up there, but still, if you're a hitter, right, it's not going to be elite of elite. But it's not of any concern for me. His slugs up there in 590. And I think his power will continue to develop. That's been the question mark with him, but it certainly developed the last couple years.
Right.
I like the fact that he could be that 120 plus 20 catcher, right? And he's probably going to share time with Davis behind the plate and play all over. The switch hitting does help him with playing all over as well. What's beautiful about the switch hitting too is his splits aren't of any concern. He has this nice short swing for both sides of the plate. So yeah, I see him as a valuable asset, and I'm hoping nobody takes him in the draft today. Because you already
I might, man. Yeah. Well, I see, because so he's my number 4. I would take him because I think he's going to have multi-positional eligibility, and I believe in him as a hitter. He was
even in our home league, I have Adley and then Ford keep. But I would consider drafting Andy just for the fact that I could play him this year and he's going to play all over.
If you don't take him, I will. That's kind of the way I see it. I loved him as a hitter. I think that you try not to get caught up in like the peripheral crap about a player, right? We're trying to look at him as a talent. Look at their skill set, evaluate them for fantasy. But I did watch I think it's on MLB.com. It was a little thing about him as a person, a video, and how much the other players on his team loved him. And he was just an admired player. They said he'll play any position. He doesn't care. He just wants to be on the field. He wants to contribute. And it was inspiring. Like I really enjoyed watching it. I typically don't get into those things. But man, I got him as a 60 hit, 60 power. Hit a really pretty swing. I liked the fact that he was, he had a very level bat in his stance, big high leg kick that he uses to time pitches, kind of a old school. I think of it as an old school, like, I don't want to say, how do I say this without, I'm going to leave that. I was going to say something I shouldn't have said. I'm going to leave that. But his really level bat, follows through with one hand at times. Same stance from the right side. I think his swing is a little shorter from the right side. I saw him elevate a ton of low pitches in the video that I watched, and he has like a kind of explodes at the ball a little bit like Gabriel Moreno does. But to me, it's catcher outfield eligibility probably, with the potential for maybe even second base.
Where do you put his athleticism from what you see?
I think he's great.
He's listed 6'0", 170.
He's probably 6 feet, 185, 190 at this point. I have his speed grade as a 45 and the potential to get, 5 steals, maybe 10 steals. So I don't think he's necessarily fast, but I think he's a good athlete, right? He's kind of what we were talking about with when you're comparing someone to Alvarez. He doesn't necessarily traditionally look like a catcher because he's not thick, but he's a very, very good athlete, and he shows the explosion in his power. So I actually think he has 300, 400, 500 potential.
Mhm.
It wouldn't surprise me to see him pop a 900 OPS season, but compared to Alvarez, it would be more about walks and extra base hits and being a 300 hitter more so than it would be about the pure power. But he's a baseball player, and I definitely, if you're comparing Endy to Henry Davis in that organization, I don't have Davis in my top 10 anymore.
Hmm.
Between the injuries and watching film, he was number 11 for me. So I
Mhm.
think Endy is the catcher of the future for them. I think if they're smart, they play Endy at another position half the time, and he
Mhm.
gets, say, 70 catching games, and Henry Davis gets the rest. Because I don't
Mhm.
think Davis is a zero. I just think he's not a top prospect anymore. But
Mhm.
I love Endy, and if you don't take him in places, I will. He's
Now,
also
the interesting thing about him as well. So I was looking at past catchers and seeing what made the top five make it in the past 10 years.
sure,
I look back at JT, and it's interesting. You know, his slug in the minors was 398.
right?
I think the max he had was 8 home runs. His contact was great, 82%. His walk was low, 8.3.
Uh-huh.
But so I think he's an indicator of what could develop in a player and a catcher if they're an athlete, right?
Right.
He's a prime athlete. Everybody knew it. What was he, a third round pick? But those things, the power develops, the walks got a little up there. He's still kind of he's still you know, what, around 10% with I, or a little bit
Mhm.
lower. And you know, he did trade his contact for power. That went down in the majors, but not a lot.
Mhm.
So I like seeing that as a filter for kind of these athletic type of catchers, and seeing the stuff that can improve once they
Right.
get to a major. So I see Endy as one of those.
I think you rank him so high because RotoWire has him at one with their catcher rankings.
James Anderson has him at one.
Yeah, I think that's why. That's your boy. All right. Who do you have at four? Are we at four now? We're at
Well, you haven't shared your
three.
one and two, right?
So my one is my two is Alvarez,
Yeah.
and my four is Endy.
Hmm.
One is Harry Ford. I'm still there. Um, even after watching film. 5'10", 200 pounds, was the Mariners' 12th pick in the 2021 draft. Number 4 catching prospect by both Pipeline and RotoWire. Takes a ton of walks, 17.6% walk rate last year. Ground ball to fly ball percentage is basically 1-to-1, which is what I look for in a player, in a balanced player. Super compact. I feel like all of his weight is literally in his thighs, because he's pretty thin up top, right? He's just got huge tree trunk legs, open stance, holds his hands really low, um, takes a big stride. The one thing that I didn't like is I saw him finish with his back knee almost to the ground, like Adrian Beltre used to do. But a very, very strong lower half, hand steady through the zone. He opened it, he had a big recoil, and then he kind of explodes at the ball, and is really a lot of power is coming from his hips. I don't see a 6-hit tool. I see a 55. I do see he's so explosive. I think that he can almost stumble into 6 power. He's that strong, right? He's that explosive. And obviously he's got 60 speed. That's what everybody looks at when they think about Ford, is the fact that he's a fast catcher. And I gave him a 70 discipline. I think that he will do enough damage to pitches. So I'll rewind. One of the skills, or one of the things I look at, is if a minor league player is taking walks, my first question is, will that translate in the major leagues? And the way that the first step for that to translate in the major leagues is the player has to be able to do real damage on pitches in the zone. Otherwise, major league pitchers are just going to throw pitches in the zone, and their stuff is so good that you're going to swing and miss, or you're not going to do any damage. But if you can do damage in the zone and take a walk, now we're talking, right? That's the player that I'm looking for. And I think Harry Ford is that guy for me. We saw enough power out of him and enough average. He hit 274 last year. Enough average and ability to beat out grounders and that sort of thing. that I think the discipline remains, and I think he remains there is potential for a 14, 15% walk rate in the major leagues, right? Because he's able to hit balls out. But I still see his risk as high. He's a 19-year-old prep catcher. I think he could just as easily become a second baseman or an outfielder. I also think as he gets older and puts on more weight, we may see some of that speed decline. So he might be a 55 speed by age 26, 27, at which point that doesn't really differentiate him from some of the other catchers anymore. But that said, I see a 280, 400, 450 season from him with an 850 OPS, and he could have 20 homers and 20 steals. Imagine 20 homers and 20 steals out in an 850 OPS at catcher. To me, that's head and shoulders above any other catcher on this list. But Harry Ford's my one.
Yeah, he's my 3. And he's, as I said, I could interchange these top 3. I love the athleticism. I think DePoto said that he's the most athletic player that he's athletic.
We coined a new term.
I don't have any bourbon in my coffee today.
That's for the evening podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
On Wednesday.
So the most athletic catcher, most athletic player, DePoto said he's ever drafted. He's, his walk rate's elite. His walk rate is higher than any player on the list, especially at 19 years old. What I like about him too, I like looking at minor league players who show a burst of improvement. So he started really slow and then increased with walks, increased with power, and he's still increasing with power. So I like the way he's developing all around. It is interesting. He is getting a lot more press right now. And the comp that keeps coming up is Biggio.
Right.
Which is interesting. Biggio initially a catcher, moves to second. I see Seattle, you never know what DePoto is saying. He's never going to show his cards, but he says they're committed to him at catcher. I could see him again as one of those players that is going to play enough at catcher. He's more athletic than Varsho, and I think he has kind of the catcher build that he can remain there versus like a Varsho. So I think he's great. I look forward to seeing him this year as he moves through the system. Maybe we could catch some minors games and
be awesome.
Yeah.
2 quick thoughts on Ford before we take a break. One is the Biggio comp is a little bit lazy. He had some good walk rate years, but his last 8 years he didn't have a walk rate above 9.2%. So I think that's simply the transition from catcher to second that they're talking about, and really with nothing else. The other one is he had not a 1-to-1 exactly, but he had 88 walks and 115 Ks. And so when you're talking about being close to a 1-to-1 ratio. All right. Great video. Maybe we'll just pause there for now. You can hear me though, right?
Yes.
Sweet. All right, so I'm just gonna get going. We were talking about Harry Ford, and I was just saying that he had 88 walks and 115 strikeouts last year. And for a 19-year-old with that kind of approach to be that close to a 1-to-1 walk to K is pretty phenomenal. Harry Ford is my number 1. I just think the attraction of power and speed and discipline is a hard one to pass up. All right. That's so my 1 through. So I have Harry Ford at 1, Francisco Alvarez at 2. My 3 was Gabriel Moreno. Did you rank Moreno or did you leave him off?
I didn't rank Moreno because I thought he had graduated, but we could talk about him definitely.
So Moreno has graduated. I still really, I don't know. I put him in the same group. So I have him at 3. Obviously, he was traded with Lourdes Gurriel to the Arizona Diamondbacks for Dalton Varsho a couple of months ago. The big question about Moreno is the power going to come, right? That's what everybody says. He has a very level stance, very balanced. High leg kick, again, elite hand-eye coordination. Everybody knows he puts the bat to ball. In the major leagues last year, in 73 plate appearances, he only had a 11% K rate, which is pretty phenomenal for a young guy. He does launch a little bit at the ball, which was like kind of fires through the zone. It's a little strange to watch, but the fact of the matter is he puts the bat on the ball all the time. 300 hitter throughout the minors last year in AAA, 315, 386, and 806 OPS. He did only have 3 home runs in 267 plate appearances, and I think that's why people are down on his power. But I watched him, his 1 home run in the majors, he hit a 91 mile an hour cutter out to right center field in Baltimore, right? Like I think it was off of Dean Kramer. But the dude, okay, so rewind. If you have the ability to put the bat on the ball like that, right? And it's good, it's hard contact. It's not bullshit contact, right? Like we talked about before. He's making hard contact all the time. And he's going to stick a catcher because he's a very good defensive catcher already. And, you have to listen to your peers when you're grading these guys. He's been a top 10 prospect for a long time. And it's not, and it's every outlet. It's not just one that's high on him. You have to listen to that. To me, there's a lot of value in, you can't ignore the fact that everyone is that high on him, and you can't knock him for not developing his power quite yet. He's 22 years old, right? To me, a simple tweak, like I know we say this a lot, but a little tiny bit of elevation in his swing, and you've got a 25 home run hitter. I still think he is. I still think he is guaranteed, say, 10 to 15, 12 to 16 home runs. But I think there's the potential for more, and he's going to get a ton of opportunity in Arizona because of what they gave up to get him. Not blocked by Carson Kelly, by the way. Do you have any other comments on Moreno?
Nope. Just as far as those metrics we're all looking at, he's and I think with catchers, especially with somebody with his elite hand-eye, can develop that power that isn't necessarily going to show right away in the minors.
Right.
Where do you think he's gonna? I was thinking about this. Where do you think he's gonna hit? Is he a 2-hitter behind Carroll?
Let me look at roster resource with them real quick. My first guess would say he ends up at 3. Maybe not this year, but soon. But I wanna see what else. I could probably name it off the top of my head, but that's not good podcasting either. So let me see here. Roster resource currently has probably Carson Kelly starting, which is funny to me.
And
so
you have Marte competing, who probably be at 2 at the start of the year, right?
Yeah, I think Carroll. So they have Carroll, Marte as 1-2. I think if Marte hits, that makes sense. I think it makes sense to go Carroll, Marte, Moreno. But I bet you Moreno to begin the season starts closer to 7 and 8. I don't think he's going to hit that high in the order until later on in the season. But I believe in his talent. I think he's a really great hitter. I do think that Varsho will have an impact in Toronto immediately, but I think that in the end, my belief is that Arizona will win that trade because Moreno will become that great of a hitter in Arizona. And I do think we're going to gravitate back towards good hitters, right? I think that the age of homers ruling everything is not over, but it's waning. And, we see Cleveland and Tampa looking for high contact hitters, right? We see some of the approach of organizations starting to change already. And a player like Moreno will be valued more as those shifts continue to happen. All right. Who do you have? So my top 4 so far: Harry Ford at 1, Francisco Alvarez at 2, Gabriel Moreno at 3, Andy Rodriguez at 4. And you've gone through your 4 already, right?
I have Bo Naylor at 4.
You do.
And I have a high jumper at 5.
Okay. Well, let's start
So,
with Naylor.
so Naylor, I have him kind of in the B plus range as far as hitting the metrics. I was a little surprised at his contact rate, that it was lower than I expected. He's at 71%. I do like his walk rate at 16%. He seemed to get more of the athletic gene compared to his brother, right? So I like that as well. He does have the highest hard hit of all the players, and I think people have discussed that he does have good EVs that we don't have access to yet.
Right.
But 496 slug, 886 OPS, and in a great organization that's going to develop him well. So I think he's a high floor catcher with proximity. And somebody that will continue to be developed within the Cleveland system. He's 6'0", 205. That's how he's listed. And yeah, I would say out of, I think with Hoppy as well, he's one of the high floor players here.
So I've got Naylor at 6. I'm in agreement with you with just about everything you said. There is question about his hit tool. That was the question coming out for him. I think Pipeline had him at a 45 hit. I have him as a 50 hit, 55 power, 55 speed, 65 discipline. Kind of player I like, especially at catcher. I think the power floor is pretty high. Even if he doesn't have a great hit tool, I still think there's 20 home runs in his bat. And he's fast enough that he stole 20 bags last year.
Yes.
And if that can translate at all into major leagues, he's got some of that Harry Ford advantage, right? It's like we were talking about earlier about athletic catchers being able to steal some bases. Again, I think the question is his hit tool. One other thing I really like about him a lot is, and I'm starting to call it the 40-40 mix, but his balanced swing I think will lead to a 40-40 mix, meaning 40% ground ball, 40% fly ball. And that helps your average. Even if you don't have a great hit tool, or if you strike out a bit, I still think that helps your average because you're not exclusively fly ball, right? The one other part about him is that I think his arm is going to help him stay at catcher as we start to see whether it's an automated strike zone or challenges, and we start to see framing maybe valued a little bit less. We'll be looking, and with the bags being bigger in the pickoff rule, I think catcher arm is going to be more important than ever. And he has a very, very good arm. And I think that will help him stay as a catcher. So you've got a guy who takes walks, who has 55 power, whose hit tool isn't great, but he's in an organization that teaches bat to ball. So I think there's a lot there for Bo Naylor. And they don't have anything else in the system, right? They signed Mike Zunino to be his teacher essentially this season. So I think sky's the limit for him. I love Bo Naylor. I don't have him too far. It's a very different skill set, but he's not too far behind Moreno for me. And if or Endy, and if he ends up being better than Francisco Alvarez, it wouldn't surprise me either. But he is my number 6. He's also RotoWire's number 3. So I'm sure that's part of your your love for him.
That's an inside joke there. There's a little sarcasm.
Right. You're not a RotoWire lover. All right. Who do you have at 5?
I have at 5. This is somebody coming from a bad system, but a fast riser. To me, he's ND Jr. I got Edgar Cuero at 5.
Cool.
5'11", 170, great athlete, switch hitter, consistent switch hitter, 75 contact, 14% walk at his age. What surprised me was his hard hit. It's all over 30s, 33, 515 slug, 943 OPS. These are the lower minors, but And then what we hear from scouts is he's consistently making hard contact with from both sides of the plate. He does have that short, flat swing, just like a Moreno, and just like an Endy with the compactness coming from both sides. So so I'm anxious to see how he develops, just because of the issues with the Angels, but he's somebody I'm going to keep a close eye on, and will definitely snag in dynasty leagues to invest in.
Awesome. I love it. I love it that you went a little bit off the board. Most everything I have is semi chalky. My 5 is in the same organization. It's Logan O'Hoppe. He, this might be my favorite position as far as just players that I like. I would be happy with O'Hoppe as my starting catcher in fantasy this year. And that's including 12-team leagues. I'd be happy with him. I think so. Last season, so he's traded from Philadelphia to the Angels for Brandon Marsh straight up at the deadline last year. He was a 23rd round draft pick in 2018, 6'2", 185. Last year in AA, 283, 416, 960 in 360 at-bats. 360 at-bats, he had 26 home runs. And he did have that 1-to-1 walk to K, so 15.7% walk and 16.6% K. He also added 7 steals. So not a lot to dislike there. I like his bat. He's got that some of that Justin Turner approach where he's trying to get the ball out in front and yank it down the left field line. He has the coordination to be able to do that. Slightly close stance, very athletic player. He's pretty slender for a catcher. Reminiscent in some ways from a build standpoint and a good skills across the board standpoint of a Real Muto. He doesn't have the same speed as Real Muto does or did, but does have that power. He might have slightly more power. One kind of idiosyncrasy is he drops his hands a bit as the pitch approaches. And so there's a little bit of hitch in his swing, but it doesn't seem to really impact his ability to make contact, obviously with the 16.6% K rate. I have him 55 hit, 60 power, 40 speed, and 60 discipline. He can take a walk. And there's potential for 270, 370, 470 is what I have him down as, with 25 homers and 5 steals. A very athletic catcher that will stick at catcher. His risk is low for me. He showed that he can hit for some average and power in the last 2 years in the minors. The minimum I have him as the minimum is a milquetoast catcher like Sean Murphy. That's my little quick write up for him. And his ceiling is as
probably better hit too.
But he's going to have opportunity, right? He's all he has is Max Stassi blocking him, and I think that O'Hoppe was a really good acquisition for the Angels, and I think he's going to be a very good player for a long time. I don't see elite potential in O'Hoppe in the same way you do with the others we've mentioned, but I see him as being a very, very good catcher and potentially some top 5 catcher years in his future fantasy wise.
Yeah, I have him at 7. I echo everything that you've said there. I thought it was a great trade. The only bad part about the trade, I would like to see him in a better park, but park factor is not going to be a determination for a minors player.
I think the range of outcomes I have for O'Hoppe is Murphy on the bottom, and which might be a little high, but I still see his floor as being pretty high, and Will Smith as his peak comp. He's got that similar skill set, which is obviously a top 3 catcher and a nice player.
It's been interesting on the Will Smith thing. So I have underneath on my Excel looking at the catchers that have graduated the past 6-7 years. All of these catchers have higher walk rates than like the Sanchez, the Varshas, the Smiths, and Real Muto. Smith is the one with the highest walk rate of graduated catchers with 12%, but most of these are over Smith and Smith was identified as having that eye. So it is interesting. I think comparing the stats of minor performance really highlights how good this catching class is
Right.
compared to past catchers. So
I think when we were looking at catchers in the past,
yeah, go ahead.
it was you had two good catchers that you were
Mhm.
excited about. It was like Jorge Alfaro and then a bunch of scrubs, right?
Uh-huh.
And for years it was that way. And so it is interesting that now that it is such a deep, it might be the deepest position for hitters that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm. Like Smith's OPS career in the minors was 811, and we're
Mhm.
seeing a lot of 900 OPS catchers coming up now, right?
Right.
And even Sanchez, who was lauded for his raw power, was 798 in the minors.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm really looking forward to see how these all turn out.
I wonder if, just as a counterpoint, I wonder if minor league conditions, minor league pitching contributes to some of that, right? I think that we see, coinciding with that, we've seen the quality pitchers being held back more and more in the minor leagues more and more every year. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if some of that could be attributed to pitchers, the quality pitchers throwing less innings, and there
Mm-hmm.
being less quality throwing a greater number of innings, allowing elite hitters to produce better numbers. I do agree with you. I think this crop is a bumper crop of catchers, and they're much better than they have been really since I can remember. But
Mm-hmm.
I would guess that there are some other factors contributing slightly as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Hoppy is your 7. Who is your 6?
My 6 is Diego Cartaya.
Ah.
He's fallen off the list. When it comes to bias here, I do own him in leagues, so I'm trying to be friendly to what I'm seeing, but I have downgraded him a bit.
Mm-hmm.
He's at 67% contact rate. He does have the eye, 14%. Hard hit is a little interesting, as far as consistency goes. I know he tops the scale on hard hit when you're talking about, the best balls he hits, but he's at 29% hard hit.
Mm-hmm.
His slug kind of is interesting as well for somebody who's lauded for his power, 503. I An issue with him for me is pathway. What are they going to do with him and Smith?
Mm-hmm.
The Dodgers are very frustrating when it comes to promoting prospects as well. How does he fit in? Right? They have somebody with an elite eye at second base in Bush, and he still hasn't played. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're still making moves that you wonder if he's just going to initially platoon. How does that help a youth coming up? So yeah, there's the beauty of the Dodgers system, but then there's also the negative.
Frustration of it.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right.
He's 6'3", a big catcher, 6'3", 219. That's a little bit of concern as well. I think Baseball America likes his defensive upside. That's why he's pushed up.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I am cautious. He does have pull side tendencies as well. So that's a concern too. So I see him as dropping a bit and wait and see as he starts to hit the high minors.
Mm-hmm. So I have a couple thoughts on Cartaya. He's my number 7 behind Bo Naylor. So first thought is they also have Dalton Rushing, who was a second round pick of the Dodgers last year. I think out of Louisville, and he can really hit. And so now you've got 2 catchers in that system in the minor leagues. They're just producing catching talent. I have a lot of the same concerns as you. I watched a bunch of film on Cartaya. I wanted to understand kind of, because we have polarizing opinions. We've seen polarizing opinions on Cartaya, right? We've seen him as high as the number 1 catcher and in the top 10 or 20 in people's lists. And then we see people that are completely out on him. What I saw was a very kind of traditional power hitter. I remember in high school, when my coach was trying to get me to hit for more power, he took my bat from being parallel to, because I used to like to keep the bat parallel to the ground, to a more perpendicular to the ground. And that kind of gave me more of an uppercut swing, and I hated it. It felt so uncomfortable to me to hit that way. but it's a power swing, right? It creates a lot more, potentially creates much more of an uppercut swing. And that's what I see in Cartaya. He's got a pretty vertical bat in his stance and a closed shoulder. And it's a to me, a traditional power hitter swing. Pretty upright stance, keeps his hands pretty high. His weight's really on his back leg, so he's big weight transfer. His swing is clearly geared for power. It's also something that the Dodgers teach. The comp for me is a like late career Salvador Perez. Now he'll walk. Obviously, Perez doesn't walk, and Cartaya will, but it's that big, thick catcher that hits for power and doesn't do a ton else. It was pretty clear to me that he was looking for fastballs to hit when I was watching him. But something else about him that I found really interesting was that he can definitely pull the fastball inside, and he can hit some sliders away. I know there's a lot of swing and miss, but I watched him hit sliders away, so I think it's in his toolbox to be able to do it. And then in the futures game, you saw him hit that really deep fly to left center off of Hunter Brown, right? That's not easy to do. But then you turn around and see him pull a four-seam fastball from Jack Leiter to ground out to third base. And so which one is it? Is he able to hit fastballs, like elite fastballs, to left center and right center? Because if he can, and he can hit 260, and he's not swinging and missing at those pitches in the zone, then he gets elevated, way higher than 7. But if if he's rolling over on stuff and he's hitting it to third base and he's trying to pull everything, then, is he a 240, 230 catcher with 20 home runs? Because I think that's there too. I have him as a 50 hit, probably like a 50 minus. I could see that being a 45. I do have him as 65 power, but he's got to not swing and miss to get to it, obviously. 35 speed. I don't think he's quite as slow as Alvarez, but he's pretty close. And 60 discipline. I think with the discipline grade, I did take into account his swing and miss in the zone. And some of the other, it's a swing and miss in the zone, meaning that he may be one of those guys where they can pump strikes to him and he's not able to actually do damage, not because he's not powerful, but because of the swing and miss. But there is a 250, 370, 500 bat there with 30 home runs, and he's a very high risk catcher to me. The last thing is he's not going to play anywhere else. He's a catcher exclusively, which can potentially limit his games played and plate appearances over his career. As we talked about, if you're not an elite bat that they're going to DH or can't play another position, you're of much less value a catcher than those who can. He's my number 7. You're up.
Number 8, Luis Campusano, San Diego. Just as far as a little social justice here, I know a lot of white people that consume 79 grams, over the course of a long time in Seattle legally. And I think he's been downgraded, unfortunately, because of that one incident, that felony in the South. And it's sad, just because, what this whole idea of makeup, comes up unjustly. I think he's been working hard on his defense with San Diego. San Diego believes in him. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes as far as what kind of trade offers that they've gotten for him, right. but they haven't traded him. They're sticking with him. Nola is going to start, but Alfaro they didn't re-sign. So he's going to be up this year. What I like about him, career-wise with his minor numbers, he's 82% contact. He's known for his hard hit. There are issues with the people questioning his swing. The last year, his hard hit and EVs have gone down a little bit. But you always wonder with San Diego's system how much the stats are exaggerated when it comes to the home park with the minors there. But like Carroll in Arizona, who also had the home park stuff, he has the high EVs that justify those type of numbers.
Mhm.
So I could see his D continuing to develop in San Diego. I could see him as a 15 home run, high 290 290 hitter, consistent hitter there in San Diego in a great lineup. So I see him as a decent floor catcher that isn't going to hurt you, and that's going to make solid contact, and even with the new shift rules and so forth, that's going to help him with his batting average as well, and hit if you're in a hit league like we are.
Mhm. I like it. I don't have him on my list. I do think he's overlooked. I do think also that, I agree with you with regards to his kind of the accusations of Campusano a couple years ago, and how the general public seems to view it. He last year, or in 21, he had a 10.5% walk, or excuse me, in 22 in AAA, in 358 plate appearances, he had 14 home runs, 62 runs, 60 RBIs. League average walk rate at 9.2%, but only 17.3% K rate. He hit 298, right, with the 363 on base. I think there is the potential he could potentially be a starting fantasy catcher as early as maybe late this year or next year. He's clearly a better hitter than Nola. I've just looked at their organizational depth chart at catcher, and there's nothing there. So all the way down to there is, but it's all the way at the bottom of the developmental list, right? But I like it. I don't have him on my list, but I can. To me, he's still a high floor player as long as he gets opportunity to play.
And I like when organizations believe in their players. So even early on during COVID, they were touting him as hitting the ball the hardest on site, and they've stuck with it. So I like despite all the outside opinions.
Right. All right. I'm staying in the organization at 8. And so number 8 for me is Ethan Salas. 16 years old. I know it's a 16-year-old catcher is pretty crazy to put in your top 10. Signed by the Padres 9 days ago in January 15th. International signing period for $5.6 million. Bloodlines, much of his father, his uncles played baseball. They say he's the best of the bunch, 6'2", 185, left-handed hitter. I just watched the little film that I could see of his swing, but man, what I have down is picture perfect stance and swing. He's got a higher elbow at 90 degrees, and he's looking to extend. Very loose swing, very, very comfortable swing. Saw him got out in front of the ball. Very short load, which I like. That big kind of crazy load just gives you opportunities to have hitches and make mistakes. He's got a very short load, and he's really balanced, right? He was never off balance with the swings that I saw. And there's explosion, right? There's athleticism in him. So I don't know. It's easy to fall in love with a player like that. And of course, he's taking swings in a cage, and there are plenty of players that can look great in a cage. But he's got the bloodlines. He's sticking at catcher. He's kind of, in some ways, not robotic, but he's been groomed to be a baseball player. And we've seen with players like Bryce Harper, those players can turn out at times. So when I compared him to the other catchers below him, I just saw, sometimes what I think to myself is, in a new fantasy draft, would I rather have this guy at Austin Wells is my 10, right? Would I rather have a 23-year-old Austin Wells who might stay at catcher in my minors as my minor league developmental catcher, or would I rather take Ethan Salas at that position? And my philosophy is take the upside, right? So yes, I have a 16-year-old at number 8 on my top 10 catchers, but Ethan Salas, I think, is one of the few that would be worth it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see where he goes in our FYPDs this year. I have him at 10.
Cool.
And again, what I liked about him, I like looking at the international class as much as, you know, potential draft with FYPD, college draft, I should say. But Baseball America, you know, echoes everything you said. He's seen as the best pure hitter in the class, right? As a 16-year-old. His swing comparisons are a lot like these short compact swings that we see from an Indy. Left-handed swing that's compact, adjustable is key as well. So he has the hand-eye to adjust and keeps the barrel through the hitting zone for a long time as well. So those are incredible kind of, you know, you're talking about pedigree. These are the unteachable things that you want in a 16-year-old coming in, and then everything else will follow.
Who is your number 8?
My 9,
9, excuse me.
Austin Wells, as well. So Austin Wells for the Yankees, 6'2", 220. I have him kind of as a B prospect. 71 contact, 14% walk. Again, these eye characteristics are very impressive with this class. His hard hits around 29, 30. 504 slug. I see him as a consistent high floor player. It's the question is with the Yankees, where is he going to end up? He's a good enough hitter to play in different places, and I just like that you have these players that show consistent qualities and metrics that go into a major league lineup like the Yankees, right? And the short porch in New York as well. So he's kind of like a Volpe type of player in the sense that he's surrounded by the aura of that lineup, and he's counting numbers because he has such good consistent traits across the board. Are going to his counting stats are going to do well.
Right. I think the Yankees are crazy for not, if they don't open the season with him in the major leagues. I know he only made it to Double-A last year, but man, you mean to tell me you're going to play? I get Jose Trevino, but like Higashioka is not. Even if he's your third catcher, right? And he's playing catcher, he's DHing, he's playing some first base. It's not like he can't take a few at bats from Rizzo, give Rizzo a rest. Giancarlo Stanton is inevitably going to get hurt. They're rolling with these old dudes, and I think that Wells could give them an infusion of youth and power and just something different. As you said, the one question with him is, well, the biggest question with him is he's going to stay at catcher, right? He's not a very good defensive catcher. I do think so. My comp was actually, you'll like this, was actually Ken Phelps. And it might be because of some of the Yankee stuff, but what I saw from him is, and real quick, I'll finish this up and we'll take a break. Left-handed swing, tons of loft. He looked like definitely a slugger to me. I did watch him hit a breaking ball off a left-hander for a grand slam. And so he can stay on the left-handers a bit, but I also saw him miss breaking stuff in the zone against right-handers. And it looks like he's trying to elevate everything. He's kind of swinging from his heels, but swinging from his heels, knowing what he's doing. I like him as a prospect. If he was a Mariner, I'd be super happy. He's my number 10. It's not as much of a question about his bat as it is whether he's going to stay a catcher. He also had 16 steals, and he's not fast. So you've got a little bit of, I think, instinct there too. But Austin Wells is a fun one for me, and someone I might target in the later rounds as a flyer, because he could hit 2025. All right. So we are down to our last catcher.
I think we covered them all now.
Did we?
Because
So I have my last one. I said Wells was at 10. I have Kevin Parada at 9.
Okay.
So Parada is not on your list. Is that correct?
Yes, mainly because I love his hit tool. Mainly because I have questions on how long he's going to stay there. But
so where do you think he ends up? Like first, third, in a corner?
A corner or some DH as well. Wonderful hit tool though. Looking forward to see what happens. But again, see what happens within, the Mets organization. Let's see how they develop.
Right. So he's my number 9. I have his risk as low. My questions on my spreadsheet say milquetoast with a little more hit tool. Does he remain at catcher? And is he a 15 home run guy or a 25 home run guy? I do think I have his hit tool as a 60. I do think he's a good hitter. Did you watch film on him at all?
No, I have not yet.
He's got the weirdest like bat drag, where he almost points it straight down at the ground, in his stance and in his load. But he's got the ability to get the bat to the ball. And so whatever he's doing is, I guess, fine with me, because he's able to get back to a place where he's in a very traditional load position as he swings. His swing is pretty geared for line drives. I think that he was the first round pick of the Mets last year, 11th overall out of Georgia Tech, 6'1", 197. He's safe, right? He's a very good bet to be at least an average major leaguer. I think he's a decent bet to be a starting catcher in fantasy for a while. I think there is some upside. I do think he's a talented guy, but he's not, like I said, he's milquetoast to me. So he's worth ranking because of the pedigree, because he's going to get opportunity. But I don't see greatness in him in the way that I do, say, a Harry Ford or a Francisco Alvarez. It'll be interesting if the Mets have 2 catchers who are pretty good hitters and really subpar defensively. Do they go with both of them and have each of them catch 80 games, or does one or both of them move off of catcher? I think it'd be a shame if neither of them caught.
Yeah, especially, I think the big question here with some of these players is how are the rules going to change, and
right.
how important is defense going to be when it comes to catcher?
Right.
So a question for you here. So if you're doing, and this isn't for competition, predicting where you're going to draft, but
Sure.
in FYPD, who do you get, Salas or who the hell we're just talking about?
Parada?
Parada, sorry.
For me, the right answer is, who's your other catcher? Right. But I can tell you, if it comes down to me and it's Salas versus Parada, I would probably take Salas 9 out of 10 times. The only way I'm taking Parada is if I have like a shit catcher with no possibility of being decent as my number 1. Then I probably would take Parada, because in my head I need someone soon, and Parada will give me a pretty high floor in all likelihood. But so for instance, in one of our dynasty leagues that we're in together, I have d'Arnaud, Elias Diaz, Carson Kelly, Logan O'Hoppe. On that team with O'Hoppe. I also have Andy Rodriguez, right? So on that team, if I'm picking between those guys, I'm definitely taking Salas, right? I don't need Parada. I've got people of similar age as Parada who are better. If I had just the veterans, just Elias Diaz, Carson Kelly, and Travis d'Arnaud, I'm going Parada. But I think that's the only time I'm taking Parada. How about you?
I would go with, again, like you said, it's about, proximity. But I would always want to stick with the catcher that's going to stay there. So, and then that's my biggest concern with Parada. I like him as a hitter, though. I still would see him as a hitter that I would certainly target in FYPD, but not necessarily as a catcher that I'm going to depend on in the future.
So why don't you go through, just to kind of end this catcher conversation, why don't you go through your 1 to 10?
Okay. Yeah, so one I have Alvarez, two I have Andy Rodriguez, three have Harry Ford, kind of all three in the same tier there. Then I have Bo Naylor, Edgar Cuero as 5, Diego Cartaya as 6, Ohapi as 7, Campunsano as 8, Wells as 9, and Salas as 10.
Did we go over bow and arrow?
Yeah, we did. Mhm.
No, I said bow and arrow, not bow nailer.
I
Uh,
said I said bone narrow.
oh, I thought you
So
said bow and arrow. That would have been even better.
we're gonna talk about Caesar Nero today in class. Maybe that's why, or maybe I was looking at him Cuero right after Naylor.
That's
So
super funny. I love it.
like
My
yeah. So
list is Harry Ford at 1, Alvarez at 2, Gabriel Moreno, who I included, at 3, Endy at 4, Logan Ohapi at 5, Bo Naylor 6, Diego Cartaya 7, Ethan Salas 8, Kevin Prada 9, and Austin Wells 10. Very interested to see what Dalton Rushing does. The beginning of 2023, I could see him slotting in pretty near Cartaya and Naylor, like in the 6-7 range, if he has a really good first couple of months. One last question with catchers: where would you put Moreno if he was eligible and you were going to put him on your list?
I would put him right after Ford as 4, between Ford and Naylor.
Got it. Sweet. Any other baseball thoughts?
Just looking forward to seeing what happens in our current dynasty draft, and we're going 55 player deep in a redistribution draft. So be interesting once we get that rolling. We've been stuck at the end of the snake here with somebody not picking.
I know I'm after him. I picked it at 7:58, so it's been two and a half hours since
yeah. Somebody just posted a smart ass comment to get rolling.
I see that. Only 21 and a half hours left. Sounds like something I would say. Cool, man. So we're going to come back on Wednesday night. Is that right? And cover for our first base top 10.
Yep.
Sweet. Anything else?
Not really.
Awesome.
Nope. All right.
It's good to see you, brother.
Man.
You too.